Welcome back to the Super-Centex Podcast, talking Central Texas high school football with Chad Conine and Batman, apparently. DJ Ramirez. So, guys, how we doing?
I mean, it's the end of September. Here we are, just sitting around waiting for one day in the 70s. Just one day in the 70s. That's all I ask.
That would be lovely.
That'll sustain me for another 3 weeks of 90s.
So, back when it was still 108, DJ wrote a story about some coaches that could have been sponsored by Johnson and Johnson because it was on Lorena's Kaeron Johnson and University's Kaeron Johnson. They're both stepping into first-year situations, pretty good programs. And both are having good seasons. So the Leopards are 3-2 overall, 1-0 in district after winning a wild shootout game with Cameron Yo last week. University, who Chad covered last week, 4-1, also 1-0 in district. They beat Killeen Chaparral. So add to those two, Chris Lancaster over at Robinson, doing a good job in his first season. Rockets are 4-1 as they go into their final non-district game against Waxahachie Life. So I'm calling this version of the podcast the Taking Sides version of the podcast, kind of like a game show. I'm asking you to take sides. So out of these three first-year coaches, who has done the most impressive job?
Lancaster.
Really?
Robinson. Look. The situations at Lorena University, I don't feel like were in a state where anybody had to panic. Especially since, like at Lorena, Kaeron Johnson had already been there for a while. He had been an assistant coach. He was a principal. People knew him. He knew this, he had already seen how things were working out and, knew the kids and everything. So I don't think that the transition there was drastic by any means. Like, I feel like they're just doing the work. The same thing at University, even though Kaeron Johnson was coming over from Midway, a lot of the assistant coaches were the same as they were when Kent Laster was there. And I feel like, Laster did a pretty good job of setting a foundation there that has continued to carry over. We kind of felt like those two teams were going to be pretty solid this year, despite the coaching change. Robinson hasn't been good in years. And I'm not just saying that,
It's been since Tommy Allison was there. And now I think you make a very fair point. I didn't even think about my own answers to these questions just because I've been kind of busy. And when you said Lancaster so fast, I had to think about it for a second, but you're absolutely right. I mean, he's their third coach in the last three seasons.
Yeah. Mike Ludlow had to have left for a reason. Like, he was only there for a year for a reason, right? And I don't know if it was just not a good fit or maybe the situation was just not working out for anybody. But, Chris Lancaster has come in and these boys are like, ride or die for the guy. And they're winning games. Like us, even in the first game against University, which they lost, there was a point where you thought, oh my gosh, the Rockets are gonna beat University, right? And so, obviously, in the end, the Trojans kind of pulled through. There were just a few things that needed to be worked on, especially being the first game of the season. But, Rockets are rolling right now. I do think that once they get into district play, there might be some more hiccups, some things that, might pop up that maybe they weren't ready for. But at the end of the day, I think they've got a pretty good chance of coming out third place in the district. So,
Chad?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to be on the podcast too this week.
Oh, shut up.
No, hey, I really like the decisiveness and the insight from DJ there. She was right on point. There's no question of the three of these, which one is sort of turning the program around and turning it in a new direction because, like she said, the direction Lorena and University are going, they have been going. I will say this, and Coach Kaeron Johnson told me on Friday night, he said, I had to just not mess things up when I got here. He said the players are here and they look good. I mean, they didn't play very good for a while the other night, and they still played good enough when it mattered. Here's the thing with the university, though, and Brice, this is one of my analogies. I hope this one lives up to it. You know, it's the good kind instead of the bad kind. But the university football program is kind of like a car that you can't really rely on, you know.
Okay.
Like it's been a clunker for a while, but yesterday it ran good all day, right? So you go out to the garage in the morning and you're like, okay, is it going to start up? You know, I mean, we put a new, carburetor on it or yesterday or whatever. So is it going to start up? And sure enough, it's fired up and it's running. So, you kind of breathe a sigh of relief in that sense.
Here's the thing. I would love to see what I would call the next Leroy Coleman era at university, meaning someone stick around for a while.
A long tenured coach.
Yeah. And I do think that Kaeron Johnson might be that guy, as a guy that has some ties to Waco. He played at Baylor. He was really excited to, you know, he's been wanting to be a head coach, you know. This is his first opportunity. And I think he's a good fit there. And so if he can stick around a while, they can build something, I think, at university. But I do agree with you guys that Lancaster certainly has taken the team that we probably had the least expectations about. And yes, it will be I think a pretty tough and competitive district once they get into district play with Gatesville and Conley and Salado and, you know, all those schools. But I think they can make the playoffs. And I said it before on here. I just think people in Robinson are starving for a winner in football. They've been wanting that a while. And so, you know, they'll do everything they can to keep him around a while as well. I will mention one other first-year coach. There's a few others that are doing good jobs. I just didn't include them in our little experiment. But you got to mention Robert Little at Riesel. Now, he's been at Riesel before, so this is not unfamiliar territory. But, you know, Riesel's playing great. And then we don't talk as much about some of our far-flung six-man schools, but Cop Earl came out of friggin' nowhere this year. They're 3-2. They got a brand new coach. They always seem to have a new coach. But the Eagles are 3-2 and playing pretty good football.
Now, you know that we have a comprehensive high school football podcast when we hit on Cop Earl.
The Cop Earl Eagles, yes.
Right.
This might have been their first mention on the Super-Centex podcast. Put it that way. So let
me say one thing about six-man schools. All right, and Wayne can cut this if he wants to, but like we always pick all these six-man games, right? And I never know if it's like a school that we actually cover or that one that just plays teams that we cover. Like I've been doing it for 20 years, and I couldn't tell you for sure some of these like Cop Earl and Morgan and you know and the like, if they're like schools we cover or schools that play schools we cover.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe you don't know all of our area schools. That's sad. All right, moving on.
Hey, do you know where Hutto, Texas is?
I don't, but they're not in our
Central Texas area. I'm just saying you don't know every little corner of the entire Central Texas area.
Well, whatever. All right, so at least 3 Central Texas programs who were winless going into last week picked up big wins, their first wins of the season. Talking about Midway, talk about Rosebud-Lott and the Fairfield Eagles. So between those 3, who do you think has the best shot of making the playoffs? Go.
I'm gonna jump in first on this one because DJ made such a good point that my talking was rendered moot last question. From everybody I've been hearing from, and granted, I don't hear a lot from Fairfield folks and Rosebud-Lott folks, but I go to church with a lot of Midway folks, and what I've been hearing from them and from you, Brice, as well, is that this is a different Midway team than the ones that have struggled in the past few seasons. And so They had a tough non-district schedule. They got themselves ready. They were in games. It was a little bit troubling that they didn't finish games a little bit better. And that, I think that's probably a confidence issue in some sense, because they haven't been winning, but a good way to start district. And some games where they're playing teams that maybe aren't quite as good as the teams they've already played. Now, one thing I want to correct that we touched on last week that maybe we were a little bit off on, Pflugerville-Weiss is ranked and looks pretty good. So
yeah,
they're
no,
definitely the front runner.
They're the one team in that district that I think is like, okay, they're the good team. I mean, but I think some other teams like Temple and Harker Heights that have been good have come back down to earth for sure. Temple is just bleeding points this year on defense, and Harker Heights lost some really good players, including Rashawn Sanford, who's at Houston, who I guess Chad will get to see maybe on Saturday against Texas Tech. But yeah, so they Harker Heights, that was their best season ever in school history last season. So those teams have come back to earth. I think that does open the door for Midway, but let's see what DJ has to say. Which of these three do you think?
Well, Midway for sure has been, right on the cusp of, being better than what we've seen them be. I don't think Rosebud-Lott was all that bad last year.
No, they were in the playoffs.
Yeah, they were in the playoffs. And I mean, obviously they kind of struggled up to start the season. They got a freshman quarterback, but then to come back and beat Crawford, who, as Levi Caraway has mentioned, is not as good as they have been. But still, is still a pretty big win, because Crawford is still has been the top dog in that district for a very long time. And I mean, I think Fairfield is going to get it together. There are a few other teams in that district that are also struggling. I mean, Mejia started off 0-5 2 years in a row. Obviously Camp and Eustace, we never really hear about a lot. But if I had to say, I'd have to agree that Midway, I feel like, is on its way to being, a playoff team.
Yeah, I think there's a chance for all three of these teams to be in the playoffs, honestly. But if you're saying who has the best chance, I'm actually going to go with Rosebud-Lott, mainly just because they have been there. They were there last year, and Jamarquise Johnson, big time playmaker for them. Now, we had the 8-2A coaches on last week. I do feel like that's a pretty competitive district. Top, maybe not top to bottom, but at least 1 through 6, I would say. I do feel like, Bosqueville, Bruceville, Eddy are kind of down a little bit, and so they're still trying to get things together. They play each other this week. Somebody's going to get a district win, but so I'll go with Rosebud-Lott, but I do strongly like Midway's chances to get in the playoffs, partially because I think that district is there for the taking. Now, Weiss is probably the favorite, but I think Midway can be in the mix. So, and one of the reasons they're in the mix is they got a good quarterback. And as always, we have an array of talented quarterbacks in Central Texas. From a statistical standpoint, and having done Stats Plus, I'm kind of well acquainted with these stats, but I'm really impressed with the seasons, and I sent y'all the stats. I'm not going to list them off here. That China Springs' Cash McCollum, Lake Belton's Eli Mascarenas, and Cameron Yo's Braylon Drake are having. Now, I know DJ saw Drake against Conley, correct? He saw Cameron Conley play. We don't really see Lake Belton a lot, but if you had one play to win the state championship and you had a choice between one of these 3 QBs, who are you taking?
Cash Davis McCollum.
Cash Davis McCollum. She knows his middle name because she wrote that feature last year.
Mr. Bull Durham.
Yeah, I love the fact that he's Cash Davis after Crash Davis. That is pretty freaking good.
I mean, I've seen him do it. like they were in the state championship last year, and yeah, a lot of the reason that they were able to come back in that second half was because of their quarterback. You know, it takes a lot to be able to put together that length of a possession time and then set up your kicker for the game-winning field goal. So yeah, I mean, he's really good. Even when they lose, he's been in games. And I mean, the Mean Green are going to have a really good quarterback.
Agreed. He's a D1 guy for a reason. Chad, what do you think?
If I had to take one of the three that you mentioned, yeah, it would be Cash because he did it last year. Now, this isn't anything against him in particular, but just across the board, high school, college, and NFL, I haven't seen very much just artful quarterback play this year, where the guy kind of has that thing where he knows where he's going with the ball and he's gonna slice you up, you know, like Tom Brady used to do and that type of thing. You know, I remember Tanner Mordecai one time against South Lake Carroll.
I was just as you were saying that, I was sitting there with Tanner Mordecai running through my head.
Yeah. And I haven't really seen that. I mean, the best thing I've seen is guys that made a play or two when they needed to make it. And I think maybe the pendulum is swung towards defenses a little bit in our football world. Defenses have figured out how to defend these pass every down offenses. And so that's my answer to this question.
Interesting. I'd have to marinate on that a little bit more before I decided
agree or disagree.
Yeah, I decided if you were right or not, because I feel like you're wrong a lot, but I am going with y'all's answer on Cash. I mean, just as you said, he's the guy that's been there, done that, won a state championship. It's quite impressive that even as they've lost a couple games, still hasn't thrown a pick. 18 touchdowns, 0 picks, completing 72% of his passes. Now, the Lake Belton QB, who I did see play on ESPN one night on a Thursday night, Eli, he's having a great year, completing 75% of his passes. He's only thrown 1 pick. Has pretty talented receiver to throw to as well. That makes a difference. But yeah, and Braylon Drake, I was actually watching some highlights of the Cameron Lorena game. You know, he's a 3A quarterback, a little bit shorter. You know, and they were running, at least in the highlights that I saw, they were running a lot of kind of passes into the flat and trying to get their guys into space and see if they could, you know, make Lorena miss and get to the end zone. I think Cash is the real deal, and as DJ said, I think North Texas is getting a pretty good QB. So, Chad, what were you gonna say?
Well, Caden Roberts, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
From Lorena. I know he wasn't one of the 3 that you mentioned, but since, you know, Cameron played then, that kind of opens the door to him. You know, 62 of 100, 7 touchdowns so far this season, 807 yards. Those are pretty good stats too. And Jaden Porter has, you know, his best receiver has missed a few games. If not, I mean, he's only played in 1 game. So, that's according to their stats, which it looks like are updated on Max Preps. But and Kason Taylor was out for several weeks. So Roberts has been doing that without, you know, his main guys to throw to, and that makes a big difference because, like, look at Patrick Mahomes first week of the season. He doesn't have his guy Kelsey there, and he looks very human.
Fair point. The game against Cameron, it was the Braylon Henry show. He had a just incredible game with 4 touchdowns, and including maybe 5 total touchdowns because he threw a halfback pass for a touchdown as well. So
yeah,
I think Caden Roberts maybe called to do a little bit less than some of these other quarterbacks we're talking about. But yes, as I said, there are a lot of good ones in Central Texas, and again, as I said, I think Ty Brown, you could throw him into that mix. He's having a really solid season for Midway. Finally, we talked a lot about 2A football last week with the 8 2A coaches, but let's revisit it a little bit. And I'm not talking about just that district. So obviously we know Mart is Mart, and we know that they'll probably be playing for a while. Of course, Chilton, who we probably haven't talked about enough, but they've also been state ranked all year, the Pirates. But we've got some 2A teams, I feel like, that are on the rise. And we're talking about Riesel, we're talking about Axtell, and Chad's personal favorite, the Itasca Wampus Cats. He's been riding that Wampus Cat bandwagon. So we might already know Chad's answer, but which of these teams, these three, Axtell, Riesel, Itasca, has the best shot of playing deep into December? Who could be in Crawford's spot, like maybe playing in a state semifinal?
I'll let you go first, Chad.
Okay, I was going to let you go first. Wait, what were the three?
Axtell, Riesel, Itasca.
Itasca. It's hard not to say. It's hard not to say Axtell out of that group, even though I want to say Itasca.
Right.
Because, like, I mean, how can you not love an underdog story like Itasca? Now, those two play the last week of the regular season, and I have a little jewel that I'm going to hold back until then, and maybe I'll reveal it there going into that game if it means anything, which maybe it does.
Nice.
But I'll hold that back. Itasca lost last week against Kearns, and Kearns plays Axtell this week. And so I think the Axtell-Kearns matchup is going to be an interesting one. If Axtell runs over them, then that'll be another signal that they are on the way to doing something big time. So I'm going to say Axtell, but I'm going to put a little asterisk by it and say keep watching the Wampus Cats.
Nice. DJ?
I was gonna say Axtell as well. And I mean, I think Riesel is probably gonna also make it deeper into the playoffs this year than they were last year. And they were in a pretty good spot last year. Both of these teams have at least 3 shutouts on the season. I know Axtell has only allowed 23 points. I think Dawson was their toughest opponent so far. And like Chad said, they play Kearns, so we'll see how the Longhorns turn out after this week, but I mean, Riesel's got a pretty good chance of coming up with a win. I mean, yeah, Rosebud-Lott is on the rise. They're feeling pretty good after that Crawford win, but Riesel's just gonna be so tough.
Agreed. So I to me it's between Riesel and Axtell. And I think Riesel's been in the second round of the playoffs now for several seasons. Robert Little steps in there and he's got them rolling, as DJ said. Not only 3 shutouts, but 3 shutouts in a row. I'm actually going to be talking to both these coaches, Axtell's Craig Horn and Riesel's Robert Little, here later today, because I'm writing something about just the shutouts. Mart has some shutouts, Riesel, Axtell. And just kind of what that means for a team. And as Chad was saying, defense still does matter. And some of them have figured out how to, shut down some of these higher scoring kind of teams. And I just think that Axtell and Riesel have a lot of confidence right now. And so if you're going to say which one could go a little bit further, I guess I'll go with Axtell, partially because of that quarterback that seems to be really coming into his own, Levi Leathers, right? Young kid, talented athlete, apparently stud baseball player, but a guy that seems to be on the rise for sure. That Axtell program is really, starting to gain some steam. Now, they got in the playoffs last year and got bounced, early. Wasn't it?
They beat Rosebud-Lott and then lost in the second round.
Yeah, to Hamilton, correct?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Wait, is that right? Did Hamilton make the 3rd round of the playoffs last year?
Oh yeah, they did. I know we were surprised at the time. Probably talked about it on the podcast. But yeah, I think Craig Horn has that team going well, but don't discount Riesel either and Robert Little. I think they have a shot to play deep as well. And we'll see about Itasca. It'll be fun. I think I'll be interested to hear Chad's little nugget in several weeks, but I think Axtell Itasca is probably the district championship game. Maybe, I don't know. Kearns is in that district too.
Like I said, if Kearns, if Itasca had managed to beat Kearns and that was a close game, it'd be a little bit different story.
Yeah. Well, nevertheless, all of those programs are, I think, building towards something that maybe we haven't seen from them in a while. So good for all three. And let's talk about where you'll be this week. Chad will be out in Waco, Texas.
Yeah, I'm going to add a new stadium to my list. I actually have my house in a couple of different, I have these big maps, and one is like West Texas, Lubbock area, and one is Central Texas. And I have pins of all the stadiums that I've covered games at. And I never covered a game in Waco, Texas before. So I'll add that one to the list as Mark goes over there to play Waco, which looks like the second best team in that district. Waco, and Waco is one that's been good in the past. I've seen Waco beat Crawford in the playoffs. It's been a minute since they were at that level, but so that'll be a fun game. And then I'm going to go from there, and I'm going to spend the night in Dublin because I'm going to Lubbock for the 2:30 Texas Tech Houston game on Saturday. So I'm going to spend the night in Dublin, Texas, so that I can get on the late night podcast.
There you go. And maybe, before you go cover the game at Hutto, you can stop by the Billy the Kid Museum.
And you know what? Dublin is also the hometown of Ben Hogan.
There you go. Okay. Well, the Billy the Kid is a museum's in Waco.
Dublin. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But nevertheless, enjoy your trip out to
that little area of the state has rich history. Like, it is kind of bizarre, kind of not a little bit controversial.
Right. Yeah.
A lot going on in there.
I don't think it was actually Billy the Kid that lived in Waco. I think it was the guy saying he was Billy the Kid, but that's a whole nother podcast. Tune in later for Stories of the Old West. DJ will be at Midway for Midway Harker Heights, her first time to see the Panthers this year.
Yeah, it should be a good time. They've got a pretty good setup over at Midway, and it's nice of you, Brice, to head over to Orlando so that somebody else can go cover the
Yes,
Panthers.
I will be also checking off a new stadium as I head to the Bounce House in Orlando for the first Big 12 game for UCF. Zach and I are flying out on Friday. I thought about trying to get on the podcast, but it's going to be like 12:45 Orlando time. I feel like I ought to get some rest. So after a long day of travel, because I'll be
Hey, will you do me a favor though? Since you're going to skip out on the podcast, will you do me a favor on Friday night when you get there?
Yeah.
Will you make a Molotov cocktail and throw it while yelling Blake Bortles?
That feels like a good way to get arrested, but okay. Fun stuff. Maybe I'll try that. So, all right. Thanks, and we'll see y'all at the games. Appreciate it.
Right, bye-bye.
Bye.